do what you say you're going to do. And your systems and practices and policies reflect that. And if you're talking about cultural competence, where cultural competence came from was in healthcare, saying that, okay, not only these perceivable differences make a difference in healthcare, but there are more subtle things that involve that you're going to have to respond to. So race and gender are obvious ones, but there are also, some class issues and educational issues. You can't do health literacy unless somebody's literate. And how literate are they? Because you can't sit with a patient and, spell out the condition. Okay, yeah, you need to take your meds, but you also need to eat with your meds, and you need to be eating the right foods, or else it's going to have this effect down the line. So cultural competence is basically assuming that you not only recognize the cultural differences, but by what you do, you are actually delivering the service that's appropriate. So he was educated at Assumption College in Canada, Eberhard Karls Universität Tübingen University, Leopold Franzen Universität Innsbruck, Austria, where he received a Doctor of Philosophy in Psychology and Psychiatry cum laude. And as evident, I've seen him present. He's semi-retired now. He speaks multiple languages. So you've heard me reference Göttingen University, where Blumenbach is. If that's the U of O, Tübingen is the OSU. They have a rivalry. They're old German universities that have this rivalry. Right? And that's where he went to school. So right away, this is not the typical African-American experience getting educated in Canada and Europe. Obviously, to get into those schools, you have to have some smarts to go beyond this and Harvard or whatever. So, construct to help people from different cultural backgrounds work together. So, when you're talking about doing strategic planning, basically you're working around change. So whether it's, Obama's hope and change or Mitt Romney's real change, it involves conflict between different sets of values, different sets of groups of people. It involves conflict. The conflict is predictable. How do you overcome it? Well, first you have to kind of know where they're coming from, or have a working assumption of where they're coming from. So any kind of strategic planning naturally involves conflict. Who is considered a leader? What kinds of power do they have? What kinds of power can they delegate? And how is power lost and gained? So when we're talking about power, right? So after seeing this, because he didn't address the issue of power directly, one of the things I focused on is, in developing Crash, all right, it's not just racism. There's other isms that are basically dividing and conquering and keeping power away from folks. So we need to be able to talk about power. Now, axiology helps along with understanding that, because then you can kind of sort of look at the history of how we see power. But these questions of who's a leader, what kinds of power do they have, what kinds of power can they delegate, how is power lost and gained? All right? So if you have a culture in which women can lead combat troops into battle, so not only be military strategists, but also be, I'm talking about, for example, Nanny of the Maroons, as well as Amina of Zaria. Right, what kind of society has women who can lead combat troops into battle? Now, in European history, you have to go back before the Romans before that can happen besides Joan of Arc, right? Well, name two European military leaders. Oh, let's go three. Three European military leaders going back for the last, let's say 2,000 years. And I just gave you one. So?
Napoleon and Charles the Great?
No, female.
Oh.
Joan of Arc. Anybody else? Okay, so look at the, all right, so then our American attitudes about women in the military, like, really? The Africans and Native Americans have no problem with that. Our women led combat troops in the battle, and we raised men that were able to follow women into battle without tripping about it for several thousand years. So obviously that power question didn't come up. It also but we're human. What makes us different from Europeans? Well, nothing. But just like when I talked about name a female scientist, and you went Madame Curie. Okay, good. Before that, nobody. All right? So your memory is informed by your education. All right? And that is also driven by your axiology. So I got to stop talking about axiology and begin to define where it came from, right? So part of that power, so it's not just Joan of Arc, it's Boudica. So Boudica was an Irish queen who fought the Romans in Ireland. She's where the English word bodacious comes from. Her husband, the king, was killed in battle, and so she led troops against the Romans and beat them. I mean, just like, the female African who led troops against Caesar, and Caesar tried to invade Nubia and lost, right? Which you never heard about until you read Asante, right? That's not part of Western civilization. Right? So that's driven by a particular axiology. So power, who's a leader? What kinds of power do they have? What kinds of power can they delegate? How is power lost and gained? What is the culture of those who are in power? And what is the culture of those who are powerless? So when Nichols is doing these workshops, essentially it's the powerful within the organization that are paying his paycheck, but he's also speaking to the powerless to empower them. When you're basically dealing with conflict, because in America we never really had a model for cross-cultural interactions. So there's a hidden dimension of culture that defines these and other questions. The question is not simply who decides which cultures are in operation, it's detecting which cultures are in operation for yourself and making the appropriate adjustment for your own actions. Now, yesterday you weren't there, so I'm going to explain this because it kind of works the same way. Sorry, I'm a psych major, not an art major. But in physics, they basically talk about a field, which is a defined space with energetic qualities. Okay, so in drawing this cube, I'm basically saying, okay, there's a 3D space. So in physics, because physics is a study of energy, how energy moves, you can talk about a magnetic field, which is a defined space where you can detect magnetism of particular intensity. And you can talk about different properties, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Defined space in which there's energetic qualities. All right? So cultures generate a field of power. And there's different types of power that are in operation within a particular cultural framework. Feel free to ask questions about that. So when we talk about in our language about a power vacuum, okay? In space, you can't breathe in space because the oxygen concentration is below 14 pounds per square inch. You can breathe without oxygen up to about 15,000 feet. And then, but if you go up to Everest, 28,000 feet, you need oxygen, though there are people that have climbed up to Everest, top of Everest and summited without oxygen. Most people breathe with oxygen because at a certain altitude in Everest, they call the death zone, just by being up there, your brain cells die from lack of oxygen. So you got a summit, be up at the summit between noon and 2 o'clock and then get down quick because you're going to die when the sun goes down if you're there after 2. Because it takes too long, right? You're in the death zone once you get up at a certain height. I think it's above 24,000 or something like that. So what I'm talking about in terms of a field, right? There's concentrations of energy, matter, whatever, right? Magnetic fields, different things have different, so you talk about different powers. There's a power vacuum, certain types of power, right? So if we use the Yoruba, it's an African American class, right? So we just talked about Yoruba. Ashe in Yoruba is the power to make things happen. Okay? And in the power to make things happen, if you have a power vacuum, certain people have, the environment is structured so that certain people have more power than others. And the rules of the power are not necessarily made visible. What gives me power in this room? Besides the fact that you had to enroll. But you had to enroll, right? And I had to go through school, get the sheepskin, get the training, study, read the books, select the books, write the syllabus, blah, 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 right? The power in the room is set up so that you're looking here, I'm dispensing knowledge, blah, 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 like it almost looks like the power is here. And I'm saying, okay, by talking about that, making those rules visible, I'm questioning them. And I'm saying, no, you need to go beyond what's in the book and what I put up here to arrive at a complete understanding. Because I'm not telling you everything, not because I'm concealing stuff. Okay? Axiology may or may not, I did reference it in the syllabus. I didn't necessarily talk about it because it's tricky. Talking about this stuff because there is no context within Western civilization to teach people how to become powerful unless they're presumed to have certain characteristics. Nichols is basically saying axiology is what's creating those differences. So if I tell you the rules of the power based on this particular culture, you'll be able to take it apart and utilize it. Hopefully you can. Hopefully you can. So, which cultures are in operation for yourself and making the appropriate adjustment for your own actions? So, and Axiology is an attempt to do that, to teach people to do that in a 2-day workshop. So, all right. so covered some of this already. But if you look at other English words with the prefix axi, axis, and axiom, imaginary line through which a world or world view turns. In mathematics, an axiom is something we hold to be true without proof, and values are similar things that we hold to be true without proof. So axiology is the basic assumptions that a culture operates on. And in Nichols' theory, basically he's working on the theory that these values were set by a culture as what was necessary to survive. So culture, then, is the collection this is not what Nichols' saying, I'm actually making this up on the spot to get us in the 21st century. Culture is the collection of pro-survival memes. Okay, that which helps us survive is good. So within his construct, these axiologies were formed about 10,000 years ago. Now, most of our history doesn't go beyond 2,000, maybe. You know, I mean, the class started at 12,000, but, you know, even starting then, it's kind of murky. What we know is only from archaeology. And the science of archaeology is coming out of a Western axiology. We only believe in stuff that we physically can touch. And we're making interpretations based on our understanding of that, which may not be the same as the people that generated the things that we now can physically touch. There might be a problem there. Okay? Basic assumptions that a culture operates on. And what he's saying, because his degrees are in psychology, these assumptions are operating on an unconscious level. Because they're unconscious, they can often move people without their conscious awareness, sort of a cultural automatic pilot or default setting if you want to use the computer model. Right? So just like we talked about stereotypes and archetypes, yes? Okay? So stereotype is basic cognitive psychology. You make a quick judgment without thinking, because you need to think quick to survive. Make a snap judgment about something without thinking about it. An archetype, basically, yeah, and I think I used it in the context of watermelon and chicken, right? Yeah. Within the culture, outside of the culture. Stereotypes are outside of the culture, archetypes are within the culture. So archetypes is where axiologies operate. But if you're outside of the culture, then it's stereotypes that tend to operate. All right, so you can see, once you kind of get and work with the concept, you can see axiology in operation in pretty much every artifact a culture produces. So how a culture sees itself and how its members relate to each other and the world, and how they know and understand the world can be said to be its axiology. So for example, an eagle feather staff. If you've ever seen those at a powwow, that's a piece of technology. Tenochtitlan, basically a city. Djembe, which is an African drum. Timbuktu, not just the city, but the university. Indian sitar. Acupuncture needle. Bombay, or actually Mumbai is what it's called today. Beijing, which used to be called Peking. A television monitor. Portable computer. Los Angeles, New York, Silicon Valley. These are all representatives of a particular cultural worldview. How you outline those cities, what is done in those cities, what the meaning of those cities is, all those different technologies. So corporations, of course, are a form of technology as well as governments. So Mondragon is different than 3M or IBM, even though they may be in basically the same business. Educational systems and pedagogy. So pedagogy is not just what you teach in the curriculum, but how you teach it, what you consider as important, what you leave in, what you leave out, what you emphasize on a test. So those are forms of technology, and LCC is different than, say, Timbuktu, Sankor, or Luxor. Okay, all these reflect certain cultural values. So an axiology encompasses a statement, I'm going to throw out a term for you. Heuristic. So what a heuristic is a form of if-then logic. Basically, it's in problem solving. If this happens, then you do this. If this is present, then you do this. Okay, so the heuristic of axiology. So when Nichols talks about axiology, he's saying that it is the highest value like a culture has a highest value that generates its technology, its worldview. Highest value, view of time, that affects behavior, because remember this is survival behavior. The epistemology, anybody know what that is? So ology means study of. Epistemology, how you know the world. And epistemology is how you know the world, and how do you know what is true and real. The way you do that. That's your epistemology. Logic. Okay, your means of reasoning to an answer. The process you use. And technology. Okay, now, technology, again, look at that ology. Study of technique. Okay? So in English, particularly in the 21st century, look at where we use the word technology. It is almost always a computer-based system. Always. When we talk about high tech. Oh, it's a computer-generated thing. Is this BPA free? This water bottle is a form of technology. May have been generated by a computer, maybe not. The reason I ask is it BPA free because these are substances which mimic certain hormones which may or may not cause cancer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Again, technology. right? Study of technique. Oh, so why isn't ceramic? Why aren't you using steel? Why? Okay? Well, it's unbreakable, more or less, unless you drop it on concrete. So technology is not just machines. So in technology, we can think of both hard technology and soft technology. Hard technology is objects, machines. Soft technology is how you do things. Kind of like the software. Software is instructions for a computer. Hard technology is the water bottle. Soft technology is whether you make tea directly in the water bottle or not. Whether that's a good idea or not. Okay, hard and soft. So an axiology in Nichols' construct is all of these. So you can see where it could get complicated. So just boiling down to 4, including that, is complicated, is probably more complicated than a lot of people want to get. The reason I'm introducing it is because when you combine that with other forms of black scientific thought, you are able to arrive at a more complete understanding, because ethnic studies is not just teaching you about black folks. It's also talking about you and then other folks too. You can use that same technology of, where did this come from? What is your language, and where did your people come from? What caused them to be like this? And where are they going? Okay, so hard technologies and soft technologies. The process is how you act in the world as a result of your axiology. So in a culture's axiology, all of those things interact. And they change over time. I think I should say something about assimilation and acculturation, because this is where the model begins to fall. Here's what's confusing about these two terms, assimilation and acculturation. They come out of Western anthropology, and sometimes they're used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. Okay? So I'm not being like Tweedledee and Tweedledum, the words mean what I say they mean. I'm not doing that. There is confusion. They are used, have been used interchangeable. So in this context, in a cultural competent context, I'm making a functional difference. Assimilation is like the board. You guys trekkers? Okay? What do the Borg say? Your technological and cultural things will be utilized to build our own. You will become like us. And what are the Borg about? Well, they inject you with nanoprobes, and they take over your body, and you become part machine and part organism, and they take over your thoughts, and they basically, you become like them, a machine-like cyborg with, and your emotions are suppressed and all that other kind of stuff. You will become like us. And all the things that are cool about you, we'll just assimilate and use them, right? The image that I like to use is like a carrot. If I eat a carrot, you can recognize it as a carrot when it's outside of my body, and when it emerges out the other end, it doesn't look much like a carrot, no more. I take all the stuff that I need to make it me, and the rest goes to waste. Assimilation's like that. You get chewed up. And defecate it out. Okay? Your cultural pattern is a race.